You ready to wake up?
I'm up. I'm up. I'm ready. I'm up.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm up. Come on.
Hey, yo, wake up.
Speaking of the beast system, beast system.
I thought this was an interesting story because I feel that it explains some of how the faith can be abused, and it comes from, I believe, The Guardian here, and the headline is "Christ and Cocaine: Rio's gangs of God blend faith and violence." And yeah, there was a period where I studied gang culture, gang violence in college from like a
You did?
sociological, yeah,
Oh, your sociology
my
stuff.
sociology stuff. Yeah, so we had to look at, the justice system, but more so like the prison system, especially gangs, how they operate. And, one of the biggest gang kingpins operated from prison for like 20 years or something.
Yeah.
It's crazy. The whole thing is just so
Is that
corrupt.
the MS-13 guy or
Don't
something like that?
remember
Yeah.
all the details, but yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah.
But here it says, let's see, let's start with the quote, "Pastor, do you think we could hold a service at my house next Thursday?" The peroxide-haired gangster wondered, cradling an AK-47 in his lap as he took a seat beside the man of God. A few months earlier, the 23-year-old had bought his first home with the fruits of his illegal work as a foot soldier for one of Rio de Janeiro's drug factions. Now he wanted to give thanks for the blessings he believed he had received from above. You got something to say?
I forgot something in the break. It's okay.
Oh.
We'll do it at the end.
Okay, quote, "I've dodged death so many times. It was he, capital He, as in God, who delivered me from evil," the drug trafficker reflected as he began another 12-hour night shift on the front line of the Brazilian city's drug conflict. That Christian conviction was echoed all around the young outlaw, on walls adorned with frescoes of the old city of Jerusalem and an extract from the epistles to the Galatians. Quote, "Walk by the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." The gangster's body celebrated his religion too. One wrist carried a tattoo of a cross and the words, "Jesus lives." The other featured the motto, quote, "May my courage be greater than my fear and my strength as great as my faith." Quote, "They know theirs is a cutthroat world, so they seek something to believe in," said Elias Santana, a favela-based preacher who has made it his mission to save the souls of Rio's ever more evangelical gangsters. When Rio's drug conflict exploded in the 1980s, Brazil's evangelical revolution was still gathering pace, and many gangsters looked to Afro-Brazilian deities such as Ogum, the god of war, for protection. Drug bosses frequented Afro-Brazilian temples, built shrines to Orixás. Am I saying that right? Orixás. And wore necklaces to show their devotion to the Umbanda and Candomblé faiths. 4 decades later, many of those sanctuaries have been replaced with sculptures of Bibles and murals of the Last Supper as a new generation of born-again criminals takes power. Born-again criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Influenced by a brotherhood of Pentecostal preachers. Oh, those Pentecostals. The sway those pastors hold over Rio's so-called narco-Pentecostals.
Whoa.
That's a gnarly name for a group.
Interesting.
Narco-Pentecostals is unmissable in the hundreds of favelas controlled by gunmen from its 3 main gangs: the Red Command, CV, the Friends of the Friends, ADA, and perhaps the most evangelical of all, the Pure Third Command, TCP. Drug lords, some regular churchgoers, have incorporated Christian symbols into their ultra-violent trade. Packets of cocaine, handguns, and uniforms are emblazoned with the Star of David, a reference to the Pentecostal belief that the return of Jews to Israel represents progress towards the second coming. Uh-huh. For those people who...
Interesting they label that a Pentecostal belief.
The few different interesting things happening here in this article,
Yeah.
when it comes to describing what people believe and the symbols that represent those beliefs. namely with this, because Star of David, there's a lot of history there. Anybody who's watched the Face Like the Sun channel knows about some of the videos that I've made on that. Gets me into trouble, but just sharing research. On one recent evening, a senior trafficker wandered into a service in suburban Rio unarmed and unannounced as a preacher read from the book of John. Quote, "I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness." Surrounded by local children and their smartly dressed parents, the gangster took a white plastic chair in the corner, bowed his head, and began to pray. Nowhere is the evangelization of Rio's underworld more visible than the Complexo de Israel, a cluster of 5 favelas near the international airport governed by, Pejao, Big Fish, a preacher turned drug peddler who takes his nickname from the ichthys Jesus fish. The drug lord's second in command is named after the Judean prophet Jeremiah, while their troops are known as the Army of the Living God. In tribute to the area's boss, a mural of the cartoon character Fishtronaut has been painted at one entrance, framed by a line from Psalm 33.
Fishtronaut. That's fun.
Blessed is
like
the
an
nation.
Astronaut, but a fish?
Yeah. From Psalm 33. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. A neon Star of David at night, visible for miles, sits on a water tower at one of the complex's highest points. Nearby, on an outcrop looking south toward Rio's Christ the Redeemer statue, a Bible sits in a display case. Quote, "Rescue me, O Lord, from evil men," reads its inscription from Psalm 140. "Protect me from men of violence who devise evil plans in their hearts and stir up war every day." Police call Pejao, I think it's Pejao, who is wanted for dozens of crimes, including torture, murder, and concealment of death, one of Rio's most ambitious and iron-handed villains, whose fast-growing criminal empire makes a mockery of his purported Christian faith. In 2019, he was accused of leading the Bondi de Jesus, or Jesus Crew, a gang of rifle-toting extremists who allegedly ransacked a succession of Afro-Brazilian temples. Afro-Brazilian celebrations have reportedly been outlawed in the complex of Israel. It's interesting. It's kind of like the modern Crusades, the way they're describing this thing.
Yeah.
But some residents...
I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
This thing is pretty long.
It is long. We don't have to read the whole thing. But
well, I'm just wondering, they're doing just sort of like a lot of description.
Yeah. So we don't have to read the whole thing. I think the interesting thing about this is the criminalization of I guess you can call it like the commercial Christian faith, if you will. And, it's been known. Didn't the CIA send quote unquote Bibles to all over Africa, but it wasn't really Bibles. It was other things, weapons, other things
it's through the NGO process. You hear about a lot of these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations that are more or less charitable organizations, but a lot of them are sort of not fake organizations. They're real organizations and do some stuff, but they are tools of the intelligence agencies to do other things, like bring in Bibles filled with whatever. Right. I remember the story you're thinking about. I can't remember what it was.
Or something.
It was something like that. Yeah. Which, just on a side note, makes it interesting that the Afghanistan debacle drone strike that was supposed to kill a terrorist but killed a NGO worker. It was something I didn't bring up at the time, but the fact that these NGOs are very tied in with the intelligence agencies makes it a little suspect.
Very suspect. The whole thing is very suspect.
But that's off topic. So,
So I just thought it was interesting, and part of the depiction of this I've seen in a lot of shows, and I don't watch that many anymore. But I remember there is a show called Ozark, and the whole show is about this American family that gets kind of wrangled up into South American drug trafficking.
Ozark. I liked Ozark.
And
Good
a lot
show.
of it is very violent, very adult theme. But a lot of that had to do with these gangsters having or displaying some kind of faith. You know, they talk about God, they talk about, all this kind of stuff. It's just interesting how that works. You know, that they would use Christianity in particular as the vehicle for this type of behavior.
Yeah. Well, South America, obviously being a pretty heavily Christianized area of the world, both through Protestant and Catholic missions over hundreds of years. But there's some interesting stuff further on in the article here, if I can just try to pick it out without getting too lost in the muck. Christina Vital, an academic who has spent nearly 30 years studying evangelism's advance into gangland Rio, said it was inevitable traffickers had embraced Christianity. Even the breathtaking evangelical tsunami that has swept over Brazilian society during that time. Evangelicals now occupied key positions in the world of crime, just as they did in media, politics, judiciary, and culture, she said. Nor was it surprising that vulnerable, marginalized young men sought guidance and compassion from the preachers searching Rio's favelas for souls. Quote, "It's such an awful, fragile life, they live in fear." Vital said the consequences of the improbable fusion between crime and Christianity were unclear. There was evidence of a certain containment of bloodshed, she said, but the blending of religious intolerance with staggering gang violence was disturbing. Pastor Elias said he respected all faiths and believed his godly crusade was helping pacify a city where hundreds of mostly young black lives are lost each year. This is Christianity's duty to save. A week after being invited to bless the foot soldier's first home, the preacher donned a garish magenta shirt and set off down winding muddy passageways to the modest first-floor abode for which the criminal had paid £1,000. He squeezed inside, accompanied by a half a dozen Bible-carrying helpers, and a group began to sing an anthem called "Oh, Jesus Loves Me." Anthem, they call it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Far from the Lord I walked on the path of horror. Never did I ask about Jesus, nor did I seek his love, they sang as the gangster bowed his head. When the singing stopped, a female church member stepped forward and clutched the host's arms as his girlfriend and mother, a cleaner just home from work, looked on. Quote, "God has chosen you. God is here right now," the woman told him. "Just look at my goosebumps. God is here," she proclaimed, her voice trembling as she summoned an angel to watch over the trafficker's life. After 20 minutes of prayer and reading from Psalm 23, the trafficker thanked his visitors over hot dogs and led them outside, visibly moved by their words. Quote, "It's a life of loneliness," said the pastor, "and Christ has come to free them from this servitude." A warm breeze coursed through the favela's narrow back, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, meow, meow, meow. So, if you are a preacher who happens to be in, where is this, Rio? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rio, living amongst the people. And of course, as a pastor, you feel it's your duty to save souls and reach out, especially to those who are in most need of Jesus's love. Like the idea of a preacher or a pastor evangelizing gang members is not unusual to me.
Yeah.
I don't, that's there's a
lot of ministries that do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty noble goal, especially if it's, in your community, your young men are getting wrapped up in this stuff. It's an obvious mission to sort of focus on helping the spiritual lives of young gang members. Of course, in the hopes that this would sort of curb the gang activity or the gang, the affiliation. But what we're reading here is it seems like, a lot of these gang members are getting saved and continuing this sort of life of crime, which is not necessarily the I don't know, best outcome or the outcome that the preacher might be shooting for. Because at the beginning of this article, it kind of sounded like the pastors were like I don't know,
part of
part of the gang.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it was being used as some sort of control mechanism to help the, maybe the consciousnesses or the consciences rather of the gang members to be able to, more easily be gang members or something. But further down, it seems like it's just a result of like some very passionate, hardworking evangelists. But yeah, still not great that now the gang activity is still going strong now, just with sort of a Christian branding on it.
Well, it's with a Christian superstition. It's not even, like true to the faith. It's more like,
right.
This is my, whatever, my superstition or my lucky charm or whatever,
right.
kind of thing.
No, you make a great point, and that is a great distinction to make between sort of an actual Christian faith, which follows the teachings of Christ, and using Christian superstition as a sort of spiritual tool for things. Like, that's where Catholics get a lot of their criticism from just even mainstream, evangelical Christianity, is that, if you wear a pendant that has, I don't know, St. Peter on it, then you will be safe, is the type of Christian superstition that, can be problematic, especially if not paired with, earnest, authentic following of the teachings of Jesus.
Right. Well, and this type of thing it's been around for a while. I just pulled up, I found an old article from 2010 here from the Daily Mail, and the headline is "Shot in the Foot: Propaganda Fear as Our Troops in Afghanistan Are Given U.S. Guns Carrying Secret Bible Codes." And basically, it's just about a set of weapons that went to Afghanistan that had like etchings of Bible verses on it. And it says here, critics said references to New Testament scriptures could be used by extremists to persuade Afghans that UK forces see their work as a crusade.
Oh, interesting.
It's always that kind of extreme, violent crusade. Yeah. And that's why I said this whole thing in Rio sounds like the modern crusade program here. They did it.
Could be
in Rome. Similar, not exactly, obviously, with different time now.
Well, and keeping in mind that oftentimes these really powerful cartels, especially drug cartels, are working in a lot of cases, or are at least allied with governments.
Central intelligence too. I mean,
right.
That's a lot of what.
Hoping to destabilize a region.
Right.
I mean, that's part of how you destabilize a region. Your intelligence guys go in, they kind of make a deal with the gangs, they arm the gangs, that helps destabilize the region, which creates a situation where you can facilitate some sort of overthrow of the government or change in regime that is beneficial to whatever the CIA's sort of goals are. I mean, it's a classic strategy. It happens all the time.
It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, so you could see how that might be a part of it, And what's one way to lessen the sort of local social problem of gang activity is, hey, they're fighting for the Lord. They're on behalf of the Lord. They're, a lot of these gangs, they at least try to position themselves as fighting on behalf of the people against, against
the oppressive
authorities,
authoritarians, usually the government.
The Robin Hood thing, a lot of these gangs try to put on a Robin Hood type of a facade, and looking or earnestly believing in sort of this Christian looking thing is a really good way to get more support from the public against your enemies in the government. There's a lot going on here.
It really does feed the vigilante mindset, I guess. If you have the right principles in place, or at least the perceived right principles being preached, You know,
Right. Well, it's a
even though they're turning
worldview.
around and shooting people in the head if they don't comply or whatever. But other than that, preach
Yeah,
love.
well, it's the criticism that atheists can sometimes rightfully
Yeah.
level against many religious people is that it's either sort of an internal forgiveness mechanism that's allowing you to commit things that you wouldn't otherwise because you have some sort of relationship that you can make right afterwards for your eternal soul, or or in addition, or the control mechanism aspect of organized
right.
religion.
Making you do things that are from the perspective of
or
an
just
alleged, yeah.
or controlling the worldview.
Okay.
If you trust your pastor implicitly, and you really only have, that's why it works in third world countries so well, is because these gang members aren't on the internet, on Christian forums, talking to other Christians, learning from other Christian leaders. It's usually just their local guy.
Right.
And whatever the local guy says goes. And so if you have a local pastor who is teaching you about Jesus, and perhaps that local pastor is on the gang payroll, and so his theology is sort of being taught as a way to justify gang activity, it is a control mechanism in that way, insofar as it does not line up with the actual teachings of Jesus and teaches exactly what needs to be taught to facilitate more effective gang activity, no more and no less.
Right. I wonder what they consider manna. They probably make that analogy. We have to get more manna. You mean cocaine?
You mean heroin? Yeah. Well, it's very sad that this happens, but it is something that happens all around the world, and I'm not quite sure what to do about it.
Well, we can keep praying for those people there.
Yeah. Dangerous place to be for sure.
Yeah.
And in a hopeless place to be. Living in these favelas. I mean, is stricken with poverty, violence, danger, especially for a young man. Oftentimes, the only choice is to join a gang, not just for, safety, but also for economics. There's no jobs, there's no nothing. It's like, oh, well, we can either starve or I can join this gang. And if this gang has a pastor where, maybe my abuela doesn't like it that I'm in a gang, but at least I can tell her that I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And take it from there.
We don't talk about Bruno.